Hey everyone, Alex Ionescu here. Welcome to Investor's Guide to the Galaxy. Ron Baron about inflation, Tesla, and real estate. Although before we start, if you find this video helpful, it would mean a lot to me if you crashed the like button and subscribe to my channel. It's totally free and takes just a split second. If you want to show more appreciation, consider subscribing to my Patreon. Now, let's dive right into it. Ron Baron is watching the news at CNBC for entertainment only. And the news doesn't change the way he thinks and acts on his investments. He's watching TV just for fun. Let that sink in. Ron Baron doesn't focus on short term, so he's not worried about inflation, wars, bad news, macro conditions. He is focused on long term investments in great companies with great people at the helm. So if you focus on the long term, you are not bothered about the daily news. He gives the Dow Jones Index as an example of how long-term investing works. In this chart, you can see the index in 1983. It was 1,100 and today is 33,000. That's a 30 times increase of your initial investment. That's how long-term investing works.
Talk a little bit about what's happening with inflation, what's happening with the economy as an investor, how you kind of add all of that up and figure out how things go from here.
So every morning, 6 to 7 o'clock, I work out and I watch you on television. And it's really entertaining for me. It doesn't make me change how I invest, but it is very entertaining, and it's nice to see the service you're providing to people and how it makes them aware of why stocks are going up and down in the short term. And so the big thing, the big picture I take away is that I started Baron Capital in 1982. And since then, there's been 1 year where the news was good. 1 year, 1989. That was the year where they took down the wall between East and West Berlin, and we thought there was going to be a peace dividend and everything's going to be fine. 1 year. And all the other years, we have pandemics and wars and inflation and panics and crashes, everything. And what happens? The stock market is 800 when we start, and it's now 33,000, so 41 times. We've done much better than that, but 41 times in the face of all this terrible, terrible news.
Great piece of advice here from this interview. Believe nothing of what you hear and half of what you see. In plain English, do your own research on your investments.
And the teacher tells us, the guidance counselor comes in to give us a lecture. And when the guidance counselor says, his name, and my friend Alan Levine, whose curveball I could never hit when I was playing ball, I never could hit it. Anyway, so call Alan, and he says, yeah, I remember it also. What I remember is that the lecture he gives us is that believe nothing that you hear and half of what you see. Nothing that you hear and half of what you see. I said, Alan, do you remember that? He says, yeah, he was my homeroom teacher. I remember that. And so that's the whole point. So imagine that when I'm in 8th grade, that's the thing that sticks in my head.
Another interesting thing he talks about is inflation and real estate. And he gives an example with his parents' house.
So don't worry about the headlines.
Yes.
So you're not worried about inflation, concerns about the potential for war, geopolitical issues with China, with Ukraine and Russia, any of those things at this point? You're just looking at what?
I believe that inflation will always persist and always has persisted, and it's a very large part of our economic model. So I think that inflation long term is 4 or 5% a year. That's what you got to think about, 4 or 5% a year. That means that everything doubles in price every 14 or 15 years. Everything. It's tuition, it's labor, it's minimum wage, it's your car, it's your house, everything. And one of the good examples I have is, I gave a whole bunch of examples in a chart, but you guys couldn't figure out how to show it as a chart. But one of them is my parents. I'm born in 1943. And my parents bought their first house, and we lived in a garage, on top of a garage in Bradley Beach. And then we bought our first house in 1948, 5 years later, and it was for $5,000 in Wanamassa. And then and we had that till 1955 when my parents sold it for $10,000, and they bought a $20,000 house, which is sold for $150,000, 10, 15, 20 years later. The bottom line is, I looked up on the internet what this house is worth. This house at 1122 Grassmere Avenue in Wanamassa, $529,000. So 100 times. That's 6.1% a year. And if I looked at the other house that they had, which was for $20,000, which is now worth $1 million something, that house is 5.1% a year. Everything you look at, steak, tuition, cars, everything, 4 or 5% a year.
Why does Ron Baron like Tesla so much?
Let's talk about Tesla, because Tesla shares for the year to date are up 80%, but for the 1 year period, they're still down 35%. This is a stock that's gone from $381 to $108 and back up over the last year. That is a lot of volatility.
Yeah.
It's been a ride.
I agree with that. So before we get deep into Tesla, I want to just make a comment about two comments about, number one, how it's the safest car that's ever been built in the world. The safest car ever built in the world. And about a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, there was a man who took his wife and 2 children, 2 daughters, and drove it off a cliff 250 feet above the ground, and at 71 miles an hour. He was trying to commit suicide and murder at the same time. The car flies off the cliff and tumbles down to the bottom, and the roof on a Tesla is 30 or 40% stronger than any other roof, and the center of gravity is the middle of the car instead of the front of the car. And it rolls down to the bottom of the hill, and everyone's looking down, and then they lower people down, and they open the doors, and people just sitting there. They were fine. They were unscathed.
Unbelievable that they got out and were able to.
So unhurt. And so I told Elon he has to text about this and tell people that if they want to commit suicide, they should not be driving a Tesla. They should drive, a Bentley. Drive a Bentley, drive it up the cliff, you'll die. Don't do it in a Tesla. So number one, the safest car ever been built. And of course he tweeted about that. Number two, Toyota. So Michael Barron, my son, and I went to visit Toyota in Japan a couple months ago. And we were meeting with an executive, and we had a translator with us because we don't speak Japanese. That guy did speak English. And so we started asking him questions. And initially, it starts off, he's responding in answering my questions in English. And then all of a sudden, he switches to Japanese. And it happens every time there's a tougher question. He starts off with English and then goes to Japanese. And I finally say, listen, I can't have a conversation with you when you have a translator, and I'm listening to this translator. I got to talk to you in English. And so it was nothing. And then we walk out, and this whole strategy behind Toyota was they are negative about electric cars. Right. And what he wanted to do is, we want to have the lowest cost of mobility in the whole world. And so as a result of that, rich people, they can plug in their cars. If you're a lot of places, there's not electricity, so you can't plug it in. So we're not into that. That was what we took away. So we walk out, and I said, Michael, I don't understand any strategy that they have here. This reminds me sort of of Sony in the 1970s. They're just stuck in their ways. But I don't know. We never heard the strategy. And he said, Dad, I've never been more bullish about Tesla. And what do you know? The head of Toyota just retired yesterday or the day before, last week. He's the grandson of the founder. And he says, I'm too old for doing this. He was 65. I'm 79. So basically, he says, I'm too old for doing this. The bottom line is that the head of Volkswagen gets fired. The head of Ford, Mark Field, gets fired because they had bad strategies, bad people. And Mark Field came to visit me a few years ago. You couldn't believe the negative things he told me about Elon Musk. All wrong. And just, he had a bad strategy, not a great executive. Okay, I shouldn't say that. All right, good guy.
I'd like to know your opinion on all of this. Please leave a comment below. If you like this video, please smash the like button so that other people like to see this video. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you that watch my videos. See you next time.